All right. Ladies and gentlemen, forgive me at this point if you don't see me looking straight at you, because over the last 3 weeks, I have been invested in my books to come up with information for you about Christianity. And I intend in this taping to give you as much as I can within the few hours that we have of everything that I could find, because it'll take me another 5 to 6 hours of another program to keep filling in the dots for you. But what you are going to have here is a scholastic breakdown and the historicities of what you good Christians out there have been worshiping. It is time to logistically put aside, to scholastically put aside, to intellectually put aside this farce called Christianity. Christianity is a hoax. It is time for us to delete our consciousness atmosphere of this presence. Now, why did I call it Vampires of Consciousness? Because that's the name of this particular tape. Vampires of Consciousness, the true historicity of the Church of Satan, Christianity. There is no Church of Satan outside of Christianity. All religion encompasses the Church of Satan. Now, why did I call it Vampires of Consciousness? Well, first, it is essential that we understand the nature of a vampire. We have to understand the nature of a vampire. One, it is a parasite by nature. Two, it feeds on the healthy, the innocent, and the unsuspecting. Three, it appears beautiful, mysterious, alluring, and powerful. Four, it sucks on the life stream of the host, depleting the life and light force until the host no longer knows who he or she is. Five, it affects and infects the host with a virus, quote unquote, until the host becomes one with the body of his Redeemer, one with the consciousness of the vampire. Six, the host loses his sense of self, no longer perceiving the world and reality from a knowledge of self, but from a perception or knowledge given to him by the vampire. That is why I call this particular tape on Christianity the Vampires of Consciousness. Christianity is crack for the mind and soul. It lives in ignorance. Ignorance is the mother of devotion. Let me repeat that. Ignorance is the mother of devotion. That which you are ignorant of, you worship, because you have no knowledge of what you worship. You believe in things you don't understand, and that's why you suffer. Stevie told you, superstition ain't no way. Christianity is crack for the soul. Religion is the crack pipe. You need to go and check the book Edgar Allan Poe, The Pit and the Pendulum. What is The Pit and the Pendulum about? The Pit and the Pendulum was written by Poe about a story told by a prisoner who was in the dungeon of the Spanish Inquisition. In there they described everything that went on in the Spanish Inquisition. Now, I didn't have all of the different books. I couldn't find it. I couldn't stay in the library long enough, and I couldn't get to all my books. Most of my books are locked away in storage. The ones that I did have, if you could see my room, I wouldn't even bring you up to my room, because my room is like a paper blizzard. I sleep on my work. All right, that's how focused I become every time I want to put a particular program together. So I wanted to put together first and foremost the books that were banned, deleted, or rejected by the Roman Christian Church as apocryphal. Now, the word apocryphal means uninspired. Uninspired simply means that, okay, this one can get through without telling too much. Here are some of the books that were deleted from the Bible. Now, let me first say this. To all you Christians out there who believe that your branch of Christianity is the one that say, oh, well, hey, that's Roman Catholicism. That's them. That's the Catholics. No, it ain't. Because the Catholics are your father and your mother. I don't give a damn what Christianity you worship. I don't give a shit what Bible you use. You are still using the texts that came out of the Roman Church under Constantine and the Council of Nicaea at 325. So you can call yourself a Lutheran. You can call yourself a Methodist, Episcopalian. I don't give a shit. You are still a Christian by any other name. You are a branch on the same tree with the same roots. Now, I can only bring out 26 of the books that were deleted. And they are the Gospels of Thomas and Nicodemus, the Proto-Evangelium of James, the Gospel of the Nativity of Mary, the history of Joseph the Carpenter, the Gospel of the childhood of the Redeemer, the Gospel according to the Egyptians, the Gospel of Bartholomew, the Gospel of Judas Iscariot, the Gospel of the Recollections of Peter, the Gospel of Adam and Eve, the Gospel of Barnabas, the Gospel of Barabbas, the Book of the Nazarenes, the Gospel of the Revelations of Peter, the Gospels of the Shepherd of Hermas, the First Epistle of Clement, the Second Epistle of Clement, the Epistle to Barnabas, the Diatessaron or the Gospel of Tatian, the Gospel of the Essenes, the Revelation of Elias, the Hymn of Jupiter of Clementius, the Proverbs of Sirach, the Book of Abu Dazura, the Gospel of Enoch, and the Gospel of the Infancy of Jesus the Christ. Y'all know anything about this? Absolutely not. You heard about the Gospel of Barnabas. Well, that's one out of how many in here? Now forgive the bottom of my head or the back of my head, because I'm going to be speaking to you from all of what I have written. It's best for me to just put it down on the record for you, because I have a lot to read to you. The birth of Constantine, the father of Christianity. On the crossroads of the Balkans near a city called Naissus, Naissus, an illegitimate child was born in 274 AD to a rural barmaid who flirted freely with a Roman officer. The boy was named Constantine. He was born in the inn. This boy was ambitious. He joined the Roman military and quickly climbed up to the ranks of soldiery in the east. On the banks of the Danube River, for bravery in the battle on that Danube River, he was made a tribune. He rose to become a Caesar. He made himself an Augustus. Patience, prudence, determination, and optimism brought this son of an innkeeper to the very banks of the Tiber at the head of an army. Now, I'm writing to you based upon my own literary license. You're actually listening to how I write. All right, so it may tend to take on flair because I like to do that. I'm a Libra. I'm an artist by nature. I'm a wordologist. All right? So it's a little flavor in here, a little season. I think we're a little grown up now. We don't need, Mary ran here. Jack saw this. All right? Across the bridge from Rome was Maxentius and his army, 200,000 strong. Now you just imagine Maxentius and Constantine across the river from one another, facing off to become the next Caesar. Now you got to remember that at the time of Constantine, Rome was about to go into the toilet anyway. And at that time, there were about 5 or 6 other thugs vying for the throne of Caesar. So there were all these little compatriots, almost like the gangs, little parts of the mafia. Whose family are you with? Constantine saw Severus try to take over Rome. Severus, somebody say something? Oh, Severus, the very man that Constantine followed. Severus went across. No good. He watched Galerius try to cross the Pontemal and failed. At Pontemal, Constantine halted his army and he waited. Now one day during his wait, he had a dream. He saw flaming in the sky a monogram in Greek of the so-called Christ of the gospel. This is the story they're giving to you. In the flame of the burning cross, there were the words, "In hoc signo vinces," or "In this sign thou shalt conquer." Regarding this particular incident, Eusebius of Caesarea, the father of ecclesiastical history and Christianity, writes, and of course he got flavorful too. At dawn, Constantine set his artificers to work and had the sign made, beautiful with gold, gems. The Romans now call the sign the labarum. It was in the following form: a long spear. The spear of destiny is what the Illuminati during the time. Now this particular spear that Constantine made became the spear of destiny. This spear of destiny is what Hitler was looking for. When he began going across the Rhine trying to destroy everything, he was actually looking for this spear of destiny for the Pope. Because the Pope said that he would support Hitler if all the countries he conquered became Catholic. They shook hands over it and said, okay. Now, it was overlaid with gold, crossed by a piece laid over. On the tip of all was a crown, formed in gold and jewels interwoven, on which were placed 2 letters indicating the name of Christ, the Greek letter P being intersected by X exactly at the center. This was the first symbol of your Christ. That is the sign that Constantine took into battle to conquer. From the transverse piece which crossed the spear was suspended a banner of purple cloth covered with profuse embroidery and bright jewels and gold. It was a square form, and over it, beneath the cross, was placed a golden half-length picture of the emperor and his children. This standard he ordered to be carried at the head of all of his armies. This was quoted from a book called The Council of Nicaea by A.W. Dudley. Now you're going to get a lot of names of books, because I made sure that you could go and find out for yourself. So Constantine with his army and the labarum, held high for inspiration, crossed the Tiber and took Rome. But it must be remembered that before all this, in the so-called 2nd century, the Roman Empire had ceased to expand. In the so-called 3rd century, it crashed to pieces. So early in the 4th century, when Roman civilization was in the last stages of its own decline, there were as many as 6 imperial thugs fighting for the throne of the Caesars. One of them was Constantine. But Constantine had one advantage, one hook that he used to gain the upper hand. He discovered that the Christians, or the Christians at the time they were called, would fight for an emperor who favored their religion. They held strategic positions secretly both within and without the society. So he struck a bargain with the Christian bishops, reaped his reward in victory over his rivals, and for this success he made Christianity the religion of the empire and suppressed all other existing systems. It was not the gospel Jesus who established Christianity, but the Roman Emperor Constantine. And it was Eusebius of Caesarea who finished the job of writing his fraudulent history of Christianity. So who knows what might have happened to the cult of Christos had not Constantine adopted it as his state religion. The Roman and Greek scholars of that time mocked and dismissed this baby Jesus nonsense in the manger, and for that they paid with their lives. In the 4th century, Christianity rode to triumph. The victory was won, but not by Christian teaching. It was won by bloody swords and religious wars that continued to disembowel Europe over the next 1600 years. These wars in Europe had not ceased. Look at Bosnia today. Bosnia today is a continuation of that Christian war. The Christian ministers of Rome thereafter were treated like kings because of Constantine. They were treated like royalty. Valuable gifts were made to the churches, and Constantine gave the palace of the Lateran to Sylvester, Bishop of Rome. This act was the beginning of the papal ascendancy. This palace was once the estate of Fausta, F-A-U-S-T-A, the wife of Constantine. Then began the systematic murder of these initiates of the ancient mystery system who refused to accept the new faith. Maxentius was Constantine's first victim. Maximian was his second. Licentius was his third. Galerius was his fourth. And you have to remember, as we go on, that he murdered his brother-in-law, he murdered his wife, and he murdered his mother, all of who would not support this new religion. Laws were instituted forbidding any other forms of worship in Rome. Churches were ordered built, and temples to the mysteries, which were actually schools at that time, at the command of Constantine, were put to the torch. In his work, The First Council of Nicaea, page 19, I'm giving you the pages, author Dudley writes, in all his orders respecting the church affairs, he acted like an ancient pope. This is Constantine. Heresies were cursed and condemned, and heretics deprived of their rights of holdings, meetings, and their houses of prayer were taken and bestowed on the Catholic Church. Their books were ordered to be sought after and destroyed. End quote. All persecution by the Church of Christianity, written on the pages of ecclesiastical history, began with Constantine and extends to the present day. The Christian emperor was the first to forbid free thought. You think about that. Big Brother ain't coming from no government. Big Brother has been with us for the last 2,000 years. In a group of writings called the Hibbert Lectures, a man named Renan translates, we search in vain through the collection of Roman laws before Constantine for any enactment aimed at free thought, or in the history of the emperors for the persecution of abstract doctrines. Not a single savant was disturbed. Men whom the Middle Ages would have burned, such as Galen, Lucian, Plotinus, all lived in peace, protected by law. Now, you got to remember, let's just take a little bit of prehistory before this happens. The light of the world had already been shining. Where was that? Kem, Egypt. Remember that all of the information, Rome was worshiping Isis, quote unquote. Rome was worshiping Krishna. These were all present. All were accounted for in Rome. Rome was essentially an open place where you can actually come and study, set up your own schools, and deal with your own teachings. There were at least 5 or 6 different forms of scholarship in Rome during that time. There were black emperors. They don't ever tell you about that. Septimus Severus was black. Constantine committed many atrocities, including the murder of, and I'm going down, Maximian, his wife's father. Basinius, his sister's husband. Licinius, his nephew. Sopater, his closest friend. Licentius, his other sister's husband. Crispus, his own son. Fausta, his wife, whom he suffocated in a boiling hot bath. She was his wife of 20 years. She bore him 3 sons. His own mother, whom he strangled with his bare hands. For all of this, the suppressing of free thought, the destroying of the ancient mysteries, the murder of all of his closest friends, and leading the church to victory over his enemies, he was canonized a saint. After his death, says Eusebius, effigies of this blessed man were engraved on Roman coins, sitting in and driving a chariot, with a hand reaching down from heaven to take him up. This is from a book called The Life of Constantine by Schlegel, Schlegel. Such is the legacy of Christianity, a religion based on bloodshed, fraud, lies, a religion founded by greedy fools and confirmed by an assassin, Constantine the so-called Great. The atrocities of Constantine were not just limited to those I previously mentioned, but he also bled to death his theopolitical rivals, threw the unbelievers down into wells, and caused countless to die in crusades to defend the faith. In the book titled The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Gibbon, the historian, says, the Church of Rome defended by violence the empire which it had acquired by fraud. I ain't saying this. I'm putting it so that you, good Christians, could go back and tell your good Christian ministers who keep spouting that bullshit from the pulpit where they get it from. We ain't scratched the surface yet. Just gonna give you just this is just running through the beginnings, because there's so much more to tell you. I got 3 or 4 books that I'm gonna read off to you. It's all right, they don't want to hear about it. They got one book, they're reading from a goddamn book anyway. So what makes this book the only book? They don't even know where this book came from. Do you know, you good Christians out there looking at this, to tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, where you think this book came from? You think God reached down with a hand and started writing on some paper because some ass put up a piece of parchment? You really believe that crap? Then you need to be enslaved. You need to be a slave. You don't even want to use the brain that God gave you. Now, Christianity was so full of shit that they even coined a phrase for the literature. They call it pious frauds. It's all right. Pious frauds were the sanctification of ecclesiastical lies. The following are direct quotes from Christianity's founding fathers, which depict the type of theological ethics practiced by them in drafting the books that would be later used as divinely inspired of God. To begin with, Jeremiah told the priests of his time that they were liars. Just go to chapter 8, verses 8 and 9. Jeremiah told you that the priests were full of shit. The priests read that and you don't get it. Who you think they are? And we see it again in 2 Kings chapter 22 verse 8. Hilkiah himself was a scheming liar, because Hilkiah came and brought some kind of book, he said, just came out of nowhere, presented it to the king. The king was so taken aback, he tore his clothes off and said, give this man anything he wants. The apostles themselves accused one another of being liars and blasphemers. Just read Revelations 2 verses 2 and 9. Read it, Revelations chapter 3, verse 9. It appears that the lying, scheming, and forgeries were continued by the Christian church fathers up to this day. T.W. Duane writes in a book called The Bible Myths. Now this book is extremely hard to get. The only way you're going to get it is in a photograph copy form. T.W. Duane, in his book The Bible Myths, page 434, it was a common practice among the early Christian fathers and saints to lie and deceive if their lies and deceits helped the cause of their Christ. Lactantius, Lactantius, the eminent Christian author, who from the beauty of his style of writing was called the Christian Cicero, writes, "Among those who seek power and gain from their religion, there will never be wanting an inclination to forge and lie for it." This is taken from Middleton's Letters from Rome, page 51. Gregory of Nazianzus, or Nazianzus, 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 in writing to Jerome, now this is what Gregory, they picked up some of the letters that Gregory wrote to Jerome. He says, "A little jargon is all that is necessary to impose upon the people. Our forefathers and doctors have often said not what they thought, but what circumstances and necessity dictated." Eusebius, the celebrated bishop of Caesarea and one of the architects of the Nicene fraud that became Christianity, said in his ecclesiastical history, go into your books, your ecumenical schools, and look for Eusebius of Caesarea and get his book called the Ecclesiastical Histories. Lies about Christianity came into being. Of this, Eusebius Gibbon, the historian, writes, "The gravest of the ecclesiastical historians, Eusebius himself, indirectly confesses that he has related only what might rebound to the glory, and that he has suppressed all that could tend to be a disgrace to his religion." Such an acknowledgement will naturally excite a suspicion that a writer who has openly violated one of the most fundamental laws of history has not paid a very strict regard to the observance of the other. And the suspicion will derive additional credit from the character of Eusebius, which was less tinctured with credulity and more practiced in the arts of courts than that of almost any of his contemporary. So what he is saying to you was, like a lawyer, he began to frame the truth. Because that's what a lawyer does. He doesn't necessarily give a damn if you kill somebody. He is about to frame the truth to get your ass off. Well, this is what Eusebius has done. The fact that he was a lawyer and the fact that he was a Christian made him doubly dangerous. And this was written from a book called Gibbon's Rome, volume 3, pages 79 and 80. Now, think about it, you good Christians, especially you scholarly Christians who think that I don't know my facts and I ain't got them straight. On what is this Christian religion based that certain information must be suppressed to save it from disgrace? Is it ever necessary to suppress truth for the good of any cause? Would the truth make men free, like John 8:32 says, actually disgrace the religious teachings of your Jesus Christ? In fact, throughout this entire seminar, we will expose the kind of work done by these early Christian fathers, who admitted that they suppressed all that they could tend to find that was disgraceful to their religion. We will see that A, the four Gospels are false. B, the Gospel stories of Jesus are only a plagiarized invention. C, that the ancient ruins of Kemet, Babylon, Sumer, Lemuria, the Maya, the Olmec, Toltecs, the Dogon, the Atlanteans had given up all their secrets and they're all now in the Vatican basements. D, the Crusades from the beginning of Christianity to the present fundamentalist resurgence was an attempt to destroy and snuff out the revealing light of truth. In the book Histoire de Manichès, volume 2, page 568, the theologian Bessoudroit says, "We see in the history of Christianity, such I have related, a sort of hypocrisy that has been perhaps too common at all times. That church men not only do not say what they think, but do say the direct contrary of what they think. Philosophers in their cabinets, out of them they are content with fables, though they well know that they are fables. Nay, even more, they deliver honest men to the executioner for having uttered what they themselves know to be the truth. How many pagans and atheists have tortured and burned holy men under the pretext of heresy. Every day do hypocrites consecrate and make people adore the host or communion, though as well convinced as I am that it is nothing but a piece of bread." You Christians and Catholics out there, go up and get your communion. Y'all really believe that bullshit, that's Christ. Y'all really believe that motherfucker on the there is drinking the blood of Jesus. Y'all really believe that crap. Yet still, when you go down to buy a used car, if they were pulling the same bullshit they were in the church that they were pulling in that church, they'd be closed down by the Better Business Bureau. But what you would tend to be skeptical of with a used car salesman, you believe wholeheartedly with the priest. You suspend completely all of your common sense, all of your logic and reasoning to believe. To believe. We some sorry asses. The theologian T. Reeves, in his Apologies of the Fathers, as quoted in Taylor's Syntagma, page 170, writes, "It was a Catholic opinion among the philosophers that pious frauds were good things, and that the people ought to be imposed on in matters of religion. Thus, when institutions were founded on fraud, murder, deceit, and falsehood, then pious frauds are good things for those who depend on it for their power and profits from these institutions." Johann Lorenz von Moscheim, in his work Church History, Volume 1, page 198, writes, "It was held by the church that it was not only lawful but praiseworthy to deceive, and even to use the expedient of a lie in order to advance the cause of truth and piety." What more Orwellian bullshit can you read into that? Of this type of mentality, their own Bible has plenty to say. The law says, "Each after his own kind. Men do not gather grapes from thorns, nor figs from thistles." Matthew 7 and 16. Now listen carefully to me. All you Christians out there speaking the crap about, hey, we don't want to hear all the information. We don't want to hear all of the work that you went in talking, all the books by people who existed at that time. What Christianity is now, those weren't the real Christians. That's the excuse. That's the mind programming. Those weren't the real Christians. We're the real Christians. Well, your Bible itself says, each after their own kind. Men do not gather grapes from thorns, nor figs from thistles. Read Matthew 7 and 16. But also go to Luke chapter 6, verses 43 and 44. "For every tree is known by its fruits, and a corrupt tree bringeth not forth good fruits." Wait a minute now. All you Bible thumpers, I'm going to your Bible. And I'm going to repeat, go to Luke chapter 6. Because you believe this bullshit. But we're going to go to the book now. "For every tree is known by its fruits." The tree of Christianity, as it is practiced for the last 2,000 years, was planted in the soil of ignorance, of murder, watered with the blood of innocents, sprouted and spread its poisonous fruits across the land, exported it to countries at the point of a sword. And in your Luke it states to you, that stupid argument to tell me that you are the Christians real now, but those weren't the Christians false back then. That the Catholics are not us. Oh, the Catholic is the church of Satan. We the real church. Where in the hell do you think you got this Bible from? But wait. Let's just take it a little bit deeper. Let's go into the Old Testament. We touched the New Testament. Let's go to the Old Testament and hear what they got to say about what Christianity was then and what you believe it is now. Let's go to Job chapter 14, verse 4. And it says, "No one can bring a clean thing out of an unclean." Check. No one can bring a clean thing out of an unclean thing. And Christianity is the filthiest, the bloodiest. You're going to see how filthy when we start quoting from this book called Dirt. Oh, I went real deep. So the cause of truth and piety cannot be advanced by deceit and lies. These only bear fruit after their kind. Listen to me, brothers and sisters. The cause of truth and piety cannot be advanced by deceit and lies. They bring fruit after their kind. And this is exactly what this society reflects today. We have been eating on the fruit of religion and Christianity. We have been nurtured by this poison, and so every part of our thinking process has been polluted. Everything that you learn in school, everything you go to science to study, everything you go to the medical schools to study has been tainted, was started on the vine that Christianity planted. The fall of man and the salvation of man through Jesus Christ is a monumental fraud. There is no Jesus Christ. Never was a Jesus Christ. And I say that with all knowledge. I don't say it with a faith that I know there's another Redeemer. The only Redeemer is here sitting in this room. Us. We redeem ourselves from our stupidity. We redeem God. God don't redeem you. If you understood what God was, God is a malicious, unfeeling, unconscious force that we bring consciousness to by our existence. We are the civilizers of God. And that's some kind of something like this. Whoa, where you, Reverend Valentine has lost it. We civilize God. Only we can understand morality. Can you talk about morality from a God that just wiped out a half of a continent of people praying to Christianity? Where was Jesus about 25 years after his assumed presence on earth when Pompeii blew up and wiped out that whole city? That's your God. God is. It is an unfeeling, unthinking, unconscious entity of force. That's all you can say it is. That which we are is God in acknowledgement of itself. We put the civilizing energy into God. It is us that will redeem ourselves from the ignorance and our ignorant acts. Isaac de Casaubon, the ecclesiastical scholar, quoted in Taylor's Diegesis, page 44, as well as in Gill's Hebrew and Christian Records, volume 2, page 19, and writes, "It mightily affects me to see how many there were in the early times of the church who considered it a capital exploit to lend to heavenly truth the help of their own inventions, in order that their new doctrine of Christianity might be more palpable, readily allowed by the wise among the Gentiles. These officious lies, they were wont to say, were devised for a good cause." Again, from Taylor's Syntagma, page 52, he quotes the Orthodox Christian scholar and Englishman Dr. P. Burnett from his thesis De Statu Mortuorum. Quote, "He purposely wrote his thesis in Latin that it might serve for the instruction of the clergy only, and not come to the knowledge of the laity, because too much light is hurtful for weak eyes." He not only justified but recommended the consummate hypocrisy of Christianity, and urged the clergy seriously to preach and maintain the doctrine of secrecy, the reality and the eternity of hell's torments, to maintain the fact that there was a hell when there was not, even though they themselves should believe of no such thing in kind. This bullshit can be read by the work of Eusebius himself. And I wrote the word bullshit there. He writes a ridiculous story about a king named Agabus who wrote a letter to Jesus and what Jesus wrote back in reply. This was in the Ecclesiastical Histories, book 1, chapter 14. Now here's a gem for you good Christians to check up on. Paul, the so-called apostle, admits to forging, lying, and deceiving for the sake of Christ. Let's turn to Corinthians 12, verse 16. Talk amongst yourselves. "And be spent with you, though the more abundantly I love you, the less I be loved." 16. "But be it so, I did not burden you, nevertheless, Being crafty, I taught you with guile. Oh, it's in your Bible. Oh, we ain't even got to the meat yet. 2 Corinthians. But they not only lied, deceived, and committed forgery, the apostle fathers absolutely destroyed all evidence against them and their crimes. They destroyed all evidence of the bogusness of their religion. If there is anything that is certain about the church fathers and Christianity, is that they always seem to be afraid of too much light being shed upon them and their true history. And remember what your apostle John said in the 3rd chapter, verse 19 and 20. Let's read it out loud for all you good Christians to hear. We'll go to John. Verse 19 and 20, John chapter 3. And this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. 20. For every one that doeth evil hateth the light, neither cometh to the light, lest his deeds should be reproved. Everything about Christianity and its beginnings have been buried in the Vatican, away from the light. And what did they tell you about those who bury the light, the truth? They hateth, because their deeds are evil. I myself, here and now, in all the subjects that I attempt to teach to you, ascribe wholeheartedly to John 3, that you got to come out into the light. Which reminds me that I know this tape goes down to different places, because I get calls from all over the country about these brothers and their tapes. And there's some people down in Atlanta who's spreading some vicious gossip about me, and I want to put it out to them. I think I know who it is. Now, the gossip went by way of Chicago to New Jersey and then got to me. See, they don't know who I know. And they don't know that there's certain people that's very close to me that already know who I am and what I do. Now, I ain't never pretended to you that I was holier than thou, was I? Did I ever tell you that I walked on water? And that I was all this goody two-shoes? I've been a low-life motherfucker from the beginning, right? Yeah. But I told you it was real. I don't give a shit what you put in the tabloids, just spell my name right. But if you're going to put something in there that makes some sense. They had me having an orgy in Atlanta, in a hotel. Now, this orgy was supposed to have been going on, and the manager called the person who booked me in the hotel, said, don't want me back there again. Now, at the time, I was going with my lady, who was down there at the time, and all of you all know Sister Tassili. She and I were together for about 1.5 years, 2 years. That was it. Now, whoever it was that supposedly spread it up to Chicago. Chicago came my way. People were upset. So I'm just putting this out there to the brother or sister, and to both, who I think it is. If it's who I think it is, I'm expecting a phone call from people who going to tell you, and you going to call me. Now, the brother up in Chicago who was trying to spread it called me because I told him that I was going to put his name out there. But the brother called me. We had a nice little talk. We stopped the shit there. But you who started it, I want to hear from you too. Because if I don't hear from you, I'm going to go the way of Bobby Hemmett. You know, I'll put it out there. Enough said. When the printing press was first invented, we read in Middleton's work called Letters from Rome, page 4, the following quote by the Catholic Cardinal Wolsey, W-O-L-S-E-Y, who foresaw what effects the invention of the printing press would have on Christianity at that time. And he said, if we do not, this is a quote, if we do not destroy this dangerous invention, it will one day destroy us. Dude must have did some heavy readings back then, because it damn sure is. The author T.W. Duane in his book, Bible Myths, and I will be quoting from Bible Myths copiously, because this book is the death knell. This was the spike. This was the wooden stake right in the heart of Christianity. He dropped all the information. This is from page 438. There can be no doubt from the evidence, quoted by Duane, found that had the objections of Porphyry, Heracles, Celsus, and other opponents of the Christian faith been permitted to come down to us, the plagiarism of the Christian scriptures from previously existing pagan documents in the specific charge they would have presented to us is the specific charge they would have presented to us. These works were ordered burned by the prudent piety of the Christian emperors, end quote. Porphyry, who existed between 205 and 270 AD, was a philosopher and a student of Plotinus. He was also a scholar who published a 15-volume work against Christianity. He wrote 15 volumes. Could you imagine? And back then, when you were writing, it was no printing press. You were writing by hand. This man took 15 volumes. Dr. Lardner, the theologian historian, writes, Porphyry's objections against Christianity were held in the greatest esteem with the Gentile people for a long time, and the Christians were not insensible of the importance of his work, as may be concluded from the several answers made to this work by Eusebius and others in great repute for learning. The Christian fathers had this great work destroyed, and all that has come down to us are only the portions quoted by others about the work. Celsus, who lived in the 2nd century AD, wrote a work entitled The True Word by Celsus. You need to go into your Catholic libraries. And he wrote it against Christianity. Doubt if you might find it there. You may find it in the Theosophy Lodge on 72nd Street. It too was destroyed by the Church Fathers. Any writings about Celsus would most likely be quoted from other people writing about Celsus. The chief source of knowledge about Celsus came from Origen and the works written against it. Now, Origen was so screwed up. Let me tell you about what Christianity did and what they've been destroyed, what they didn't realize about Christianity. Origen was so completely out of his mind about Christianity, he had his wood cut off because he believed that his wood was leading him into sensual pleasures that were bedamned about it. He had the bad boy cut off because Christianity told him, and in the time when Christianity began to flower through the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries, mortification became the order of the day. The filthier you are, the more mortified you became, the closer to God was the actual principle. That's what they told you. The filthier you were, the closer you were to God. Now we continue with ecclesiastical lying and forgery. Bishop Warburton states, a lie has no legs and cannot stand, but it has wings and can fly far and wide. Lord Montagnier writes, a liar would be brave before God while he is a coward before man. My brothers and sisters, it required an age of darkness, at least 1,500 years, to force the doctrine of Christianity onto humanity, and it has required a steady and continual darkening of the mind to make people believe in that doctrine. But the student of metaphysics will be released from that darkness. Much of the works of the early philosophers who produced some potent arguments against Christianity, but as mentioned earlier, they were sought out and destroyed by the early church fathers. For example, the thesis of Celsus was sent to Origen by a man called Ambrosius with a request that he should refute or argue with it. Origen set about the task of doing this, and it was from Origen's responses that we learned about the arguments of Celsus. His writings are capsulized as follows. Celsus did not believe in miracles or the supernatural. He understood universal law to be the regular orderly orders of the day with no variation. He asserted that the only possibility of the existence of such a person as Jesus of the 4 Gospels that he could conceive depended upon him being a demon, based on all the shit he did in the Bible. Jesus displayed none of the qualities that he deemed essential displayed all of the none of the qualities that he displayed as a demon. He therefore rejected these pretensions as being inconsistent with his philosophy. But he believed that even on the basis of the philosophy that permitted the supernatural, he claims for Jesus that the same claims for the supernatural must be rejected. So his arguments are made to become that of a Jew. The Jew rejects the virgin birth of Jesus. The true story of Jesus was that of Mary was that she was divorced from her husband and wandered about, fell in with a Roman soldier named Panthera, and this man was the father of Jesus. So she was hoeing about for a little while, hoeing and scoring at the nightclub inns, just like Constantine. Now, wait a minute, check this out. Let me tell you something. Christianity is the one that makes you think that you're born out of wedlock. You are a bastard child. That's a lot of bullshit, because let me tell you something. If you look at all of the stories and the mythos of all the saviors born, all of them were conceived based on an illicit relationship. The so-called quick pregnancy of the bastard child coming into base, those are the most intelligent children. The ones that come from the one-night stand. Because there is no exhaustion of the seed. Usually when you see each other, it's like, come on. And after the come on, bang, get pregnant, that's the strongest moment. The most passion at that particular time. All of your saviors came this way. Look at Zeus. When Zeus saw Aphrodite, he said, damn. He said, damn. But he was married. Now, Aphrodite was out there bathing, looking good in the water. He knew he couldn't sneak up as a bull. He couldn't sneak up as anything else. How do you sneak up on her? He changed himself into a swan. Now, I don't know what Aphrodite was thinking about. But this is the myth. The same damn myth happened when Mary, here's Joseph now, he just got a new bride. My boy said, oh yeah, we're going to get to the nuptial bed. But he's a virgin, and the Lord said, no, you can't have none. I'm going to have her. So what comes down? A dove. Check it. Now that's some sick shit. Now you know why the early church fathers was into fucking cows and sheep. That's right. There's a law. An ecclesiastical law. From you can't fuck sheep. That's where Christianity came from. They had to write a law. I think it was Pope Innocent or Pope Leo. Had to write it down for these priests. Stop fucking the little boys and stop fucking the animals. It's deep. This is what you... Wait a minute. Let's go back. Yeah, they're still doing it now. For every tree is known by its fruits, and a corrupt tree bringeth not forth good fruit. No one can bring a clean thing out of an unclean thing. Yes.
Also, they say Mary was an immaculate conception.
Yeah.
Then when you look when I studied, found out what immaculate conception meant, that just meant two people dealing on a spiritual.
Yeah, but immaculate conception is the virgin birth, which is something I'm going to go into when I'm writing my other book.
And my mother was one.
Well, yeah. Well, you see, in those days, if you were not born of a father, you were actually looked down on. As a matter of fact, in those days, the sun could get you pregnant. Now, if you can get pregnant from the sun, because have you ever checked out sperm? Have you ever checked out what sperm look like? They call sperm what? Ora seminalis. Listen to the words. Ora seminalis. If you look at the head of the sperm, there's a halo around it. There's a light in it. So, essentially what you have, sperm is nothing more than the condensed tincture of sunlight. The essence that goes into creating the feminine principle, though part of the sun, her particular wavelength is silver. So gold is male, silver is female. These alchemic principles are what go into creating life. That's the bond. That sets up the chemistry. K-H-A-M. History. All right? So understanding that the male sperm is nothing more than a transport system for light. And it is actually not the sperm that's creating the implosion that creates the explosion called life. It is the light that it is bearing. Okay? Check? All right, now. As a matter of fact, when the story goes that when Joseph found out she was pregnant, he took her back to the temple where he got her. He said, what the hell's going on? And then they said, when Elizabeth said, hell no, get out of here. When got her husband, who was the head of the temple in Jerusalem at the time, and he got the soldiers to kick Joseph out. That's why they had to leave. Take her. She's yours now. Now, the argument goes as follows. One, if Jesus was God, as you hear John 1 and 14 states, would he have chosen such wicked and worthless men as we find in his apostles? Because they were stupid. Two, if he knew that Judas would betray him, why did he make Judas his companion? Three, these are logical questions. Three, the story of the crucifixion and the resurrection are especially stupid and absurd. Jesus was condemned publicly before the eyes of all. No one could doubt this. If he rose again, why did he not make his justification as public as his condemnation? Would he not have confronted his judge, his accusers, the general public, and given irrefutable proof and evidence that he was not a fraud, but he was the Son of God? Four, who saw Jesus after he rose from the dead? A half-insane woman and one or two of his followers. Now, wait a minute. I'm the Lord come down in the flesh. I'm standing before everybody in the Sanhedrin in the crown of thorns being persecuted, talking shit. Yet, to prove who I am, I come back to the dead just to stay in hiding? If your divine purpose, as all these priests keep telling you, was to come and show the lowly people what was going down by your sacrifice, by hanging on the cross, by dying and then coming back, why would you not let everybody know? In the second part of his thesis, Celsus tests the beliefs of Christians by philosophical principles. He shows that the Chemites and the Greeks previously taught all that was true to Christianity and had it in a nobler and better form. He ends his document with a practical note to all Christians. Give up your stupid separatists and your tendencies to separate, to stop worshiping demons, and to join in all civil and military duties imposed on citizens of the state. He goes on to say that God is God and beautiful and blessed. He therefore cannot change. For if he were to change, it would only be for the worse. Therefore God cannot come down as a man. This is what he's saying. See? Check it out now. Has he not the power to do all things without assuming a material body? Does he not know all things? Is he not able as God to do everything that he would do as incarnated God? And no real advantage is gained by men, for they do not know God any better by seeing him in a bodily form. God must be seen by the soul or the spirit, and men are deceived if they imagine they know him better by seeing him in a corruptible body. You understand what I'm saying? The only time you should be seeing any God is within and from within. Anytime you see any man walking, you get sick and tired of looking at him. You're seeing him eat, piss, shit, and they say, well, damn, he's just me. Wouldn't he have served it better than to come down and did something else? Than to come down as we are? What is it being said that you are that? I know I got a little perverted slant on shit, don't I? All right. All right. I just wanted y'all to know that, I don't abjure the Christians themselves. I abjure the ignorance under which they are comatose. They got the bite in the neck. You can see the 2 teeth marks when a Christian comes up. You can see the Walking Dead when they ring your doorbell and put that awake in your face. They look dead. Nor can the purpose of Christianity, a signs for the incarnation of God in the flesh, be regarded as true, much less logical. The nature of the whole, that is, the omniscience of being, is always one and the same. There is always the same amount of evil in the world as there is good. There is nothing evil in God. The evil is matter. You will understand that as we see it go on. God is continually making the evil serve the good, as always it has. This being the case, it is absurd to believe and assert that God would be especially interested only in a few members of the human race. He works always for the whole. Hence, the Judeo-Christian doctrine is patently stupid, peculiar, and absurd. Did God, at the particular time, suddenly arise from a coma, and just like that resolve to rescue only a few Caucasoids that came out of the mountains to adopt Christianity and Judaism? By exhibiting the superiority of the ancient teachings, Celsus points to the circumstances that had the ancients appeal to reason, where the Christians, with absolutely nothing to appeal to reason, cries out with their ignorant masses to believe, to believe. He goes on to say that the doctrine of the Son of God was copied from Plato, who copied it from the Chemites. Now, as to the teachings of Paul, you got to remember Paul was the Christian. He was the one that was assigned the work of the church. Every time you turn on them blasted televangelists, they're running something from Paul. That Creflo dollar, boy. Creflo pimp a dollar. I decided to dedicate a portion of this lecture to Paul after I saw a television broadcast with the theological crack pusher Creflo Dollar and some other Christian shows called The Believer's Voice of Victory. These people were talking such bullshit with Paul was concerned that I decided to set the record straight. Now, again, I use the word bullshit right there for myself. The testimony of Paul, by all accounts, shows proof by evidence taken from the New Testament that Jesus the Christ, or Iesus, the anointed one of the 4 Gospels, is a mythological character. To this end, we will first examine the testimony of Paul, for he is the first Christian writer whose works had been allowed to come down to the masses. Paul, or Saul, is promoted by Christianity as the greatest writer of its earliest time. He seems to have done more than any other person to establish the Christian religion, if his alleged epistles contained in the New Testaments can be said to be true. I say this because of the true history of Paul we know nothing. We find no evidence as to when he was born, how long he lived, or at what dates the several events of his life occurred. It is said that he was sent to Rome sometime before the death of Festus, which occurred about 62 A.D. It appears that he suffered martyrdom in the so-called Neroian, Drew Nero, executions during 64 A.D. If any of the epistles of Paul in the New Testament were written by him, then they were prepared by one who lived in Jerusalem when Jesus the Christ of the 4 Gospels is said to have been teaching there. If the alleged facts of the life and work of Jesus were known to anyone of the first century of Christianity, Paul is the one who should have known about it most fully. If Jerusalem was the place of Paul's education, now you can look in Acts chapter 22, verse 3. They tell you that that's where he was taught. Then his education must have been going on at the time of the preaching and the death of this person called Jesus. This makes this inquiry and investigation even more eerie and strange if Jesus were a real person, that is, living and preaching at that time, that Paul never met him, much less knew anything of his teachings, since, as we were told by the Bible, that the fame of Jesus went out all over the world. Now you could talk about that. Matthew 4 and 24, Matthew 9, 26 and 31, Matthew 14 and 1. Mark 1 and 28, Luke 4, 14, 37, Luke 5 and 15. All of these are the Bible depictions that tell you that Jesus and his ministry were known throughout the world. Where was Paul? That he heard and knew nothing of these things. Paul admits that he never saw Jesus, except in a damn vision. Go to Acts 18 and 9. Go to Acts 9, 3 to 5. Go to 1 Corinthians 9, verse 1. Go to 1 Corinthians 15 and 8. You want proof? I'm giving it to you. Then it appears that he did not see Jesus in a vision, for the man that journeyed with him, those men who journeyed with him, stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no man. Go to Acts 9 and 7. Go to Acts 26 and 14. He further states that the men with him heard not the voice. Go to Acts 22 and 9. Paul appears to boast of not seeing Jesus, not even meet him, nor even heard him. In Galatians 1 and 11, 11 and 12, Paul says, the gospel which was preached of me is not after man, but neither receiveth it of man, neither was I taught it, but by the revelation of Jesus the Christ. Now you know somebody wrote them words into his mouth. Think. Apart from this line being an obvious forgery, Paul is professed to have derived his knowledge from supernatural sources, from dreams and trances and visions. Acts 9, verse 3 to 9, Acts 26, verse 13 to 19. Dreams and trances and visions appear to be the foundation of all Christianity, from Constantine to Paul. Read Genesis 46, 2 to 4. Read Exodus 11 and 5. Read Exodus 12, 29 to 33. Exodus 14 and 25. Acts 12, 6 and 7. Now I'm putting these down to you to tell you that you could go to all of these, because all of your church fathers keeps telling you that the only way they got to know about God is in visions and dreams. So what makes them so damn special that you can't do the same damn thing? Why must they codify it and qualify it for you? Give it a name that you're going to kneel down and genuflect and worship to. Why don't you give it a name? Out of these dreams, visions, and trances came the works that we accept as the word of God. And we accept it or we be damned. Ye must accept the book, because what? This is the word of God, the inspired word of God. Ye be born again or be damned. The silence of Paul relative to the alleged miracles of Jesus is difficult to understand. Nowhere in Paul's epistles does he speak about the wondrous works of his Jesus the Christ. Why is that? Of course not. All these miracles is hard to understand, and I will display the particulars so that all of you good Christians who believe in belief rather than reason. 1, Paul says he was reared and educated in Jerusalem. You can read that in Acts 22 and 3, Acts 26, 4 and 5. 2, as proof of his residency, he is documented as having consented to the stoning to death of Stephen. Read Acts 8 and 1. 3, Paul is advancing the cause of Jesus, but makes not a single specific reference to anything he ever said or did. On the other hand, he quotes quite freely from other prominent people. For example, in Corinthians 1, verse 2 and 9, Paul quotes as scripture a passage which both Origen and James admits was taken from an apocryphal work called The Revelation of Elias. It's one of the books they took out of the Bible. 2, in Acts 17, verse 28, Paul quotes verbatim et literatim from the phenomena. Now, phenomena written by the Greek poet Aratus, and from the hymn of Jupiter of Clentus. This is, if you read in Acts 17 and 28, this was taken from a Greek poem called Aratus, or the poet called Aratus, and it was a hymn to Jupiter. 6, the saying, evil communicates corrupt good, evil communications corrupt good manners, in 1 Corinthians 15 and 33, was quoted by Paul from the Face of Menander, one of the 7 wise men of Greece. This was a book. The Face of Menander was one of the teachers in Greek, and it says here, he took the word, evil communications corrupt good manners. This 1 Corinthians 15 and 33 was taken directly from that work. In the book of Titus, chapter 1, verse 12, he quotes from the Greek poet Epidentus and calls him a prophet. But with all the above, he never quotes from the Gospels of Jesus, from the 4 Gospels, not once. Why is that? 8, he never mentions the virgin birth in Matthew 1. Pardon me. Fine Paths of Consciousness, tape 1. He never mentions the virgin birth, Matthew 1, 18 through 21. 9, he knows nothing about the voice from heaven saying, this is my beloved Son, from Matthew 3 and 17. He knows nothing of the transfiguration, from Matthew 17 and 2, Mark 9 and 2. He knows nothing of the alleged miracles performed by Jesus. He knows not the slightest knowledge of the teachings of Jesus. He stated quite emphatically that he was made a minister of the gospel, which had already been preached to every creation under heaven. Read Colossians 1 and 23. If he is preaching a gospel that was already preached to everyone under the sun, why are they ascribing Paul this particular gospel, saying that he was one of the acolytes of Jesus and he's sort of putting it up? Now, he preached a God manifest in the flesh who had been believed in the world in Timothy 3, 1 Timothy 3 and 16. In fact, this previous reference could not have been to Jesus, whose doctrine had not been preached at that time, nor generally believed in the world till ages after that time. 15, Paul knows nothing of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 1 through 12. 16, he knows nothing about the Lord's Prayer, Matthew 6, 9 through 13. He knows nothing about the parables. In all of his epistles, Paul quotes not a single word, not a single saying of Jesus. He never once cites signs and wonders rendered by or for Jesus. In fact, more than once, he speaks of his own miracles in 2 Corinthians 12 and 12. But he positively refuses to discuss any miracles except those signs done by himself or by the influence of Jesus. Romans 15, 18 and 19. When preaching at Jerusalem, Paul omits those marvelous incidents that were the career of Jesus and fails to describe them even to the Gentiles. 22, the population of Lystra was more than anxious to worship Paul for merely curing a cripple. Those at Melita said that he was a god because he was not killed by a serpent. Read Acts 28 and 6. Those in Ephesus loved his tailoring expertise because Paul could sew. Read that in Acts 8, 19 and 12. Now, all of these things that Paul are talking about, how is it that Creflo Dollar can sit up there and talk about the fact that Paul was talking about Jesus Christ? He was not talking about Jesus Christ. He was talking about Jesus the Christed. Now, we're going to get back to Paul. In the oldest Gospels, there appears in Matthew 2, verse 4, where the Christ should be born. Matthew 11:2 reads, John hearing in the person the works of the Christ. The Christ. In the same gospel, it is also stated that Jesus said to his disciples, whom say ye that I am? And Simon Peter answered and said, thou art the Christ. Then changed and charged his disciples that they should tell no man that he was Jesus, the Christ. In Greek, it was Christos. Hindu, it is Krishna, and it means the anointed. Now, the word Christ was used very liberally at that time for great potentates. Cyrus, the king of Persia, was called the Christ. Mithras of Persia was also known as the Christ. Heru, or Horus, was known as the Christ. Bel Minor was known as the Christ. Io was known as the Christ. Adonai was known as the Christ. Each of them was called the Anointed One, or the Christ. The title of the Christ, or the Anointed One, was applied even at the time to the King of Israel. The title of the Christ was applied to religious teachers, teachers of factions, necromancers, wonder workers, and even the magicians of the time were called the Christ. This common usage was shown in the Gospels themselves. Look at Matthew 24, 23, and 24. Look at Deuteronomy 13 and 1. Then if any man shall say unto you, lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs. Deuteronomy 13 and 1. There shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that, if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. False Christs tells you that the word Christs was used a hell of a lot more than we believe it was used. These statements show that the Christ was a title only. Therefore, it is a title. As a title, it cannot be a name. Thus, this is strong evidence that all passages in the New Testament which contains the word Christ as a name exposes the hand of the early Christian forgers at work, as he interweaved into the Pauline epistles certain spurious words and passages to fabricate evidence in an attempt to give validity and existence to a person that was completely unknown to history. It was only by devious customs and habits extended over thousands of years' time that the title the Christ gradually mutated into a name, and Jesus Christ, or later still Christ Jesus, became one designation. The name Jesus is a Latin transliteralization of the Greek Iesus, I-E-S-O-U-S, which in turn is transliterated from the Hebrew Yeshua, Yeshua, or Joshua, meaning Jehovah is salvation. In one form or another, this name appears throughout the Old Testament. During the Hellenic period of Rome, the name Jesus wasn't well received by the Jews because they saw it as a bastardization of Yeshua or Joshua. So many people with the same name Jesus adopted the purely Greek analog Jason. And this name appears in this form in the New Testament as well. Acts 17 and 5. Huh? Acts 17 and 5. Jason is another word for Jesus. Jason and the Argonauts. How many Argonauts were there? 12. Huh? And go to Romans 16 and 21 as well. After the so-called captivity, the name is seen frequently and is interchanged frequently with Jehoshua, the successor of Moses, who is called Jesus more than once in the New Testament. Look at Acts 7 and 45. Later on, the name Jesus became one of the commonest Jewish names appearing in the New Testament. See Acts 13 and 6, see Acts 18 and 7, and see Colossians 4 and 11. The name Bar-Abbas is also Jesus. although it was deleted from the chief manuscripts by the Christian fathers, specifically Origen, who was careful to see that no sinner among these had borne the name of their Jesus the Christ. And you could read this at the Encyclopedia Britannica, 9th edition, volume 13, page 656. T.W. Dewan, in his book, Bible Myths, writes, "We know of a Jesus, son of Sirach, a writer of Proverbs, whose collection is preserved among the apocryphal books of the Old Testament. The notorious Barabbas, son of Abbas, was himself called Jesus. Among Paul's opponents, we find a magician called Elymas, the son of Jesus. Among the Christians, a certain Jesus, also called Justus, is known and written about. Josephus mentions more than 10 different distinct persons, priests, robbers, peasants, lowlives, and others, who bore the name Jesus, all of whom lived during the last century of the Jewish state." Who is this Jesus that you got hanging on the cross and you genuflect to every Sunday? The evidence appears very distinct and plain that Jesus the Christ of the four Gospels was unknown to Paul. The life story of Jesus the Christ of the four Gospels was not invented and written until 4 generations after the death of Paul. That is the only explanation that can be offered for the fact that Paul makes absolutely no references to the teachings and miracles of Jesus the Christ of the four Gospels. In fact, there is no proof that Paul himself actually lived. The Encyclopedia Biblica, listen, the Encyclopedia Biblica states, "It is true that the picture of Paul drawn by later times differs utterly in more or fewer of its details from the original legend has made itself master of this person. The simple truth has been mixed up with invention. Paul has become the hero of an admiring band of the more highly developed Christians." Now, Marshall J. Gauvin, Gauvin, wrote a book called "Did Jesus Really Live?" And on page 58, he says, check it out. Now, this is from the Encyclopedia Biblica. He took it from here. "The Christian authority admits that invention has done its work in manufacturing at least part of the life of Paul, the earliest Christian writer. In truth, the ablest Christian authors and scholars reject all but 4 of the Pauline epistles as being spurious." Listen carefully, people. This is in the Encyclopedia Biblica. They reject all but 4 of the epistles as being spurious. Some maintain that Paul was not the author of any of them. The very existence of Paul is questionable. Give me a chance to get my Now let's talk about the crucifixion, because all you folks just love to talk about how he died on the cross for us. Yep. Let's talk about all this stuff about the crucifixion. Okay. The 16 Crucified Saviors. Have you read that book? He knows it. Dr. Kersey Graves. Page 129 and 130. Dr. Kersey Graves states, "We find that there has always been a margin for doubt amongst his own followers as to the fact that the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, and this in the very country and era of its occurrence. Many of the early Christians and contemporary Jews and Gentiles doubted it, and some openly disputed that it ever occurred. Others bestowed upon it the mere spiritual signification, and not a few considered it merely symbolical of a holy life. One circumstance calculated to lead to the entire discredit of the story of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ is the revelation in connection to it, a violent convulsion of nature and the resurrection of long-buried saints. Events not supported by any authentic contemporaneous history, sacred or profane. As these events must be set down as fabulous, they leave the mind in doubt." Listen to what he says. "They leave the mind in doubt with respect to the fact of the crucifixion itself, especially when the many absurdities involved in the doctrine of crucifixion are brought into view. The connection with it, some of them so palpably erroneous that an unlettered idiot could see and point them out." Important point. If the canonization of saints did not take place until after the establishment of Christianity as a state religion, who in the hell are these saints that rose from the dead when Christ had just died? Think. In your Bible, they said that the saints were resurrected at the death of Christ. Which saints? Conjures up pictures of Michael Jackson and, you know, dun, 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 dun. Thriller! You think about it. The saints arose from the dead at the time Jesus died, but Christianity did not come into being until what? 300 years afterwards. But the saints rose at the time. Yeah, okay. I'd like to know who the names of these saints are. All right. Who is it? Elijah, Job, Jeremiah, Samuel? Who? Huh? Now, what event did they say led to the crucifixion of Jesus? Let's look at John 11, 47 to 53. Come on, John. We're doing it the way you would do it, right? Your minister tells you, turn to John. I wish I had all y'all with your Bibles. Turn to John 11, 47 and 53. 47, they gathered the chief priests and the Pharisees a council and said, "What do we? For this man doeth many miracles." 48, if we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him, and the Romans shall come and take away both our place and nation. And one of them, named Caiaphas, being the high priest, that same year said unto them, "Ye know nothing at all." Now check out how the medical killers work. "Nor consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not." Don't that's what they say about keeping the fact that they kill people in the hospitals constantly? Think about it. "And this spake not of himself, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus should die for that nation. And not for that nation only, but that also he should gather together in one the children of God that were scattered abroad. Then from that day forth they took counsel together for to put him to death." Now, I'm reading that because what is to come will show you something completely contrary to what you have been perceiving. Now, the specific thing about putting him to death, his miracle of raising Lazarus from the dead, on learning of it, the Jewish council met, and from that day forth they took counsel together for to put him to death. This is the most improbable and ridiculous statement if you know the truth about Roman history at that time. And it's an insult to reason if you look at it deep enough. First of all, who would kill a man if he could raise a festering corpse back to life? I'll be going back to all my peoples. Yo, they're going to want right there. Raise him, raise her, leave that motherfucker. No, raise him. There you go. All right? If this crucifixion was a fact instead of a fable, it seems odd that the four Gospels contain so many contradictions about this one event. Ain't nobody got it straight. For example, the Luke version states that a multitude followed Jesus as he went to his execution, and also a woman wailed and lamented him, Luke 23 and 27. But the other Gospels don't seem to agree. John says that he and Jesus' mother, along with Mary Magdalene, his wife, by the way. See, Mary Magdalene was his wife. There were many Marys. All right? And that's another story I'm going to tell you later on to show you how, by the writing that in Jewish law, Mary Magdalene, based upon everything that they would do, that you said, I am not yet, that things that Jesus was saying, would show you that they were following Jesus' Hebrew law or Jewish law, and that the only role that Mary Magdalene could have been playing was one of Jesus' wife, because of what it is that Jesus was telling her to do. And only the wife would do that. That's because they don't teach you Jewish history when they're teaching you Judeo-Christian history. Matthew denies John's account. Now, John says that he and Jesus' mother, along with Mary Magdalene and two other women, were right at the cross at the execution. That's John 20 and 25. Matthew denies John's account. This is in Matthew 27 and 56. And so does Mark on 15 and 40, where the both of them state that Mary Magdalene with other women in Galilee were far off someplace. Luke says that the women of Galilee stood afar off. John said they were at the cross. Now check this. Just a couple of days before the crucifixion, Jesus had raised a man from the dead a couple of miles outside of town. This is in John 11, 43 and 44. He just raised somebody from the dead. This miracle alone, the Bible states in John 11 and 45, as well as John 12 and 9 and 11, many Jews at that time began to believe on him. That's what the Bible said. The Jews began to believe on him. And even the priests and Pharisees were constrained to witness and knowledge to his miraculous powers. Read John 11 and 47. The priest was saying, damn, this boy got the flavor. Yet, Matthew, Mark, and Luke know absolutely nothing of this incident because they don't talk about it. Why is it that John is the only one who knows about this dude, man, doing something that nobody should have been able to do? But instead they tell of this mocking and cursing and reviling by the spectators as he was suffering. Luke says that even the soldiers joined in on this type of conduct. You read Luke 23 and 36 for that. All the Gospels agree that lots were cast for his clothes. And you could read that in 22 and 18. Even the part about the thieves were in accordance with Jeremiah 48 and 27. Jesus was buried very privately by one man, though John adds another figure, I guess, to early, one to carry the foot of the corpse, I guess. John 19, 38 to 40. Perhaps the both men were rich, as was the requirement in Isaiah 53 and 9. This version of a super simple and unwarranted funeral for a man that worked incredible wonders just a few days before stinks of churchism. In contrast, a man named Stephen, shortly after, was murdered by a mob, but was buried by devoted men, who right there in Jerusalem made great lamentations over Stephen. Acts 8 and 2. Wait a minute, you just killed the Messiah. The dead got up. The earth quaked. I raised the dead, the blind to see, the deaf to hear, the lame to walk. And couldn't get another motherfucker to carry my feet to the grave? And here goes Stephen. Who the hell is Stephen? They killed this sucker. Stone him at the insistence of Paul. Yet still there's people all over him, crying and wailing and gnashing of teeth. Ain't nobody dealing with the logic. Stephen had no fame, not even as a prophet. He didn't raise the dead, walk on water, make the blind to see, nor was he announced and acknowledged by a voice from heaven that was heard by the Son of God. Matthew 3 and 17. There was no earthquakes at his death, nor did the corpses of the dead pop out of their graves and walk the earth. Consequently, this Jesus must have been a nobody. That is, compared to Stephen. Such miracles are supposed to have occurred at the death of Jesus when the earth quaked and the rocks were rent. That was in 1 Kings 19 and 11. When the dead rose up out of the graves, read Daniel 12 and 2. And the vial or the mishak of the temple was torn. That's in Isaiah 22 and 8. All culminating in the Roman centurion admitting that this is the Son of God. Matthew 27 and 54, would seem to be enough to bring out the whole damn population at his burial. There should have been a mob of fans, and even the priests themselves, to see if he could raise himself off the dead. If he was getting ready to raise dead, I'd be at his grave. You kidding? Just like these paparazzi? Okay, you did it for them, but let's see you do your own shit. Yeah, at Coney Island, yeah. And he's still laying there dead and rotting.
That's in Cambria Heights.
Cambria Heights. The priests could not have stopped any fans from attending the funeral either, because Matthew 21 and 46 made it quite clear that these priests feared the multitude. Matthew 21 and 46. So they weren't going to stop a multitude that supposedly knew this man made all these miracles.